The blood-red sunset painted the Montana prairie as Sarah Foster collapsed in the wheat field, her calloused hands still clutching the scythe, even as her knees buckled beneath her. 7 children waiting in the small farmhouse behind her, and not a single one old enough to bring in the harvest that would see them through the coming winter of 1876. Sarah wiped the sweat from her brow, leaving a streak of dirt across her face. She had been working since dawn, determined to finish another section before nightfall. With Thomas 3 months in the grave, taken by a sudden fever that swept through their settlement, the responsibility of the farm and their 7 children fell squarely on her shoulders. At 32, Sarah had grown accustomed to hard work, but these past months had pushed her beyond what any person should endure. The oldest, 12-year-old Mary, helped with the younger ones, but the harvest demanded strength Sarah was quickly losing. She tried to stand again, but her legs refused to cooperate. The dizzy spell that had been threatening all afternoon finally overwhelmed her, and she slumped forward into the golden wheat. That was how Clayton Irwin found her as he rode the boundary of his neighboring ranch. The tall cowboy pulled his horse to a stop when he spotted the lone figure in the field. Dismounting quickly, he hurried over and knelt beside her. "Mrs. Foster," he called, gently turning her over. Her face was flushed with exhaustion, her breathing shallow. Sarah's eyes fluttered open. "The children," she whispered. "I'll get you to them," Clayton promised, though he had only exchanged pleasantries with the widow Foster in town on occasion. He had watched from a distance as she struggled after Thomas's passing, admiring her determination even as he worried for her well-being. Without hesitation, Clayton carefully lifted Sarah onto his back. She weighed hardly anything, and the realization that she had been working herself to starvation struck him hard. Securing her arms around his neck, he began the trek toward her farmhouse, leading his horse beside them. "I can walk," Sarah protested weakly. "Save your strength, Mrs. Foster," Clayton replied, adjusting her weight more securely. "Those little ones need you healthy." As they approached the farmhouse, the door burst open. Mary appeared, her face etched with concern that deepened when she saw her mother being carried by the tall cowboy. "Ma," she cried out, rushing forward. "She's just exhausted," Clayton explained quickly, his voice gentle. "Where can I lay her down?" Mary led him inside, where 6 more pairs of eyes watched wide with worry. The youngest, barely 4, began to cry at the sight of his mother's limp form. Clayton followed Mary to a small bedroom and carefully laid Sarah on the bed. She stirred, trying again to rise. "The harvest," she murmured. "We'll still be there tomorrow," Clayton said firmly. "Right now, you need rest." Mary brought a cup of water, which Sarah sipped gratefully. The other children hovered in the doorway, uncertain and afraid. Clayton turned to them with a reassuring smile. "Your ma just worked too hard today. She'll be right as rain after some rest." He glanced around the sparse room, noting the nearly empty pantry visible through the kitchen door. "When's the last time you all had a proper meal?" The children exchanged glances but didn't answer. "I thought so," Clayton said, removing his hat. "Mary, is it? Show me what you've got in the kitchen. I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage something." While Mary helped him gather the meager supplies, Clayton learned that they had been living primarily on bread and whatever vegetables were ready in their garden. The meat had run out weeks ago, and Sarah had been selling eggs to buy flour and necessities. Using some jerky from his saddlebag and vegetables from their garden, Clayton cobbled together a stew that had the children gathering eagerly around the table. He sent the oldest boy, 10-year-old James, to tend to his horse while he worked. Sarah awakened to the unfamiliar sound of laughter in her kitchen. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. It had been so long since she'd heard her children sound so carefree. Then she remembered collapsing in the field and the strong arms that had carried her home. She pushed herself up, surprised at how weak she felt, and made her way to the door. The sight that greeted her was entirely unexpected. Clayton Irwin, known throughout the county as a solitary rancher who rarely socialized, sat at her table surrounded by her children, telling them a story that had even solemn little Peter giggling. He spotted her immediately. "Mrs. Foster, you should be resting." "I've rested enough," she said, though her body disagreed. "I appreciate your help, Mr. Irwin, but I need to get back to the field before dark." Clayton stood. "The field will wait. Your health won't." His voice was firm but kind. "I've had some of my men ride over to continue your harvest. They should have a good portion done by tomorrow." Sarah stared at him, unable to comprehend his generosity. "Why would you do that?" "Neighbors help neighbors, Mrs. Foster. That's how we survive out here." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, and she quickly blinked them away. She had not allowed herself to cry since Thomas's funeral, not even when the bank threatened foreclosure if she missed a payment. Clayton seemed to read her thoughts. "When was your last payment due?" "Last week," she admitted, sinking into a chair as her legs threatened to give out again. Clayton nodded. "We'll figure something out." And somehow Sarah believed him. The next morning Sarah awoke to the sound of hammering. She hurried to dress, alarmed that she had slept so deeply. Mary was already up, feeding the younger children breakfast. "Mr. Irwin came back at dawn," Mary explained, a hint of admiration in her voice. "He brought 4 men with him. They're working the field and fixing the roof that's been leaking." Sarah stepped outside, shading her eyes against the bright morning sun. Sure enough, Clayton's ranch hands were spread across her wheat field, working with an efficiency she could never have managed alone. Clayton himself was on the roof, replacing damaged shingles. He spotted her and waved, then carefully made his way down the ladder. "You should have let me pay them," Sarah said immediately. Clayton shook his head. "My men owed me extra work. Besides, James here has been a great help." He nodded toward her son, who beamed with pride as he handed tools to one of the ranch hands. "I can't accept charity," Sarah insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. "It's not charity, Mrs. Foster. It's an investment." "Investment?" Clayton's expression grew serious. "I've been thinking about expanding my cattle operation. Your land adjoins mine and would be perfect for additional grazing. But I need someone who knows this land to partner with me." Sarah stared at him. "Are you offering me a business arrangement?" "I am. You keep your farm, I get grazing rights on part of your land, and my men help with your harvest. We split the profits from both ventures." It was too good to be true, and Sarah's natural caution made her suspicious. "Why would you do this?" Clayton's blue eyes held hers steadily. "Because I admire what you're trying to do here, Mrs. Foster. And because no one should have to carry the weight of 7 children alone." Over the following weeks, the arrangement proved beneficial to both. Clayton's men finished the harvest in days rather than the weeks it would have taken Sarah alone. He insisted on advancing her enough money to make her bank payment, against her future earnings from their partnership. Sarah found herself watching for Clayton's visits, which became more frequent as autumn deepened toward winter. He always brought something with him: fresh meat, supplies from town, or occasionally treats for the children. The younger ones began running to greet him when his horse appeared on the horizon. One evening, after the children were asleep, Clayton lingered by the fire. Sarah sat across from him, mending one of James's shirts. "You're looking better," Clayton observed. "Some color in your cheeks again." Sarah smiled, touching her face self-consciously. "I'm feeling stronger, thanks to you." "Thanks to your own determination," he countered. "You would have found a way, with or without me." Sarah set aside her mending. "Why aren't you married, Mr. Irwin? A man like you should have a family of his own." Clayton's eyes reflected the firelight as he considered her question. Never found the right woman, I suppose. Or perhaps I was waiting for someone who needed me. The implication in his words hung between them, heavy with possibility. Sarah felt a flush that had nothing to do with the fire's warmth. I should go, Clayton said, rising reluctantly. It's getting late. Sarah walked him to the door. Thank you again for everything. He paused, his hat in his hands. Sarah, he said, using her given name for the first time. I want you to know that our arrangement comes with no expectations beyond business. I know that, she replied quietly. But, he continued, his voice deepening, if there ever came a time when you might consider more, I hope you'll let me know. Before she could respond, he placed his hat on his head, nodded once, and stepped into the night. Sarah closed the door and leaned against it, her heart beating rapidly. It had been nearly a year since Thomas died, and she had not once considered the possibility of loving another man. Yet Clayton's steady presence had gradually become something she looked forward to, something she missed when he was gone. As winter settled over the Montana territory, Clayton ensured that Sarah's home was prepared for the harsh weather. He helped reinforce windows, stockpile firewood, and fill the root cellar with preserved foods. His visits became a lifeline during snowstorms that isolated the farmhouse for days at a time. The children adored him. Even baby Anne, typically shy around strangers, would raise her arms to be held whenever Clayton entered the room. Sarah watched as he patiently taught James how to whittle, showed Peter how to properly care for the horses, and listened attentively to Mary's stories. One particularly brutal blizzard struck just before Christmas. Clayton arrived as the first snowflakes began to fall, bringing a small pine tree strapped to his saddle. Thought the little ones might like a Christmas tree, he explained as he stomped snow from his boots. The children's excitement filled the house as they helped Clayton set up the tree in the corner of the main room. Mary brought out the few ornaments they had saved from better times, and Clayton produced colorful paper and string from his saddlebag to make new decorations. As the storm intensified outside, they gathered around the table, cutting shapes and stringing popcorn. Sarah found herself laughing alongside her children, the weight of grief and responsibility temporarily lifted from her shoulders. Clayton caught her eye across the table and smiled, a private look that sent warmth spreading through her chest. Later that night, with the children finally asleep after the excitement, Sarah and Clayton sat before the fire. The howling wind rattled the windows, but inside all was warm and secure. I should head back before it gets worse, Clayton said, though he made no move to leave. You can't possibly ride in this, Sarah protested. You'll stay here tonight. Clayton raised an eyebrow. People will talk. People always talk, Sarah replied. Better that than you freezing to death. She prepared a pallet for him near the fire, and they sat talking long into the night. Clayton told her about growing up in Texas, about driving cattle north after the war, and eventually settling in Montana. Sarah shared stories of her childhood in Ohio, meeting Thomas when she was 18, and their journey west to build a new life. You ever regret coming here? Clayton asked. Sarah considered the question seriously. Sometimes in my darkest moments. But then I look at this land, at what we've built, at my children playing free as wild horses, and I know this is where we belong. She paused. Thomas loved it here. He used to say the sky was bigger than all our problems combined. Sounds like he was a good man. He was, Sarah affirmed. And he would have approved of you, Clayton Irwin. The blizzard lasted 3 days, keeping Clayton at the Foster farm. During that time, he became truly integrated into their family rhythm. He fixed the broken chair that had been propped against the wall for months, taught the older children card games, and even managed to coax a smile from Sarah when he tried his hand at baking bread and produced something closer to a brick. By the time the storm cleared and the paths were navigable again, something had shifted between them. It wasn't spoken aloud, but it was present in the lingering glances, the casual touches, the way Sarah found herself watching the road long after Clayton had disappeared from view. Spring came early that year, bringing new life to the land and new possibilities to Sarah's heart. Clayton's business proposal had proven profitable through the winter, with his cattle weathering the season well on the agreed portion of her land, and preparations for spring planting going more smoothly with his occasional help. One warm April evening, Clayton rode up as Sarah was hanging laundry. The children were scattered around the yard, engaged in various chores and games. "Got something to show you," he called, dismounting. "Can you ride out with me a ways?" Sarah hesitated, glancing at the children. "Mary can watch the little ones," Clayton suggested. "We won't be gone long." Curious, Sarah agreed. Clayton helped her mount his second horse, and they rode across the budding prairie, the land coming alive with spring wildflowers. "Where are we going?" she asked as they crested a small rise. "Just over here," he replied, leading her toward a grove of cottonwoods that marked the boundary between their properties. As they approached, Sarah gasped. Among the trees stood the frame of a new structure, the beginnings of what appeared to be a substantial house. Clayton watched her reaction carefully. "I'm building a new place," he explained. "The old cabin was fine for a bachelor, but I've been thinking I might need more room." Sarah dismounted slowly, walking toward the structure. "It's going to be beautiful," she said, noting the wide porch that would face the sunset, the large windows that would catch the morning light. "I thought so too." Clayton came to stand beside her. "There's room for a big family here." Sarah looked at him sharply, understanding his meaning. "Clayton, hear me out, Sarah," he said quietly. "I know it hasn't been that long since Thomas, and I know taking on 7 children isn't what most men would consider a sensible proposition." He smiled slightly. "But I'm not most men, and those children have become as dear to me as if they were my own." He took her hands in his. "I love you, Sarah Foster. I love your strength, your determination, your heart. I love the family you've created, and I want to be part of it officially, properly." Tears filled Sarah's eyes. "I've been so afraid to admit what I was feeling," she whispered. "It seemed disloyal to Thomas." "Thomas would want you and the children to be happy and secure," Clayton said gently. Sarah looked up at the half-built house, then back to the man before her. "You started building this before you asked me," Clayton chuckled. "I'm an optimist, and I figured even if you turned me down, I still needed a bigger place." Sarah laughed through her tears. "When have I ever been able to say no to you, Clayton Irwin?" His answer was to pull her into his arms, kissing her with all the tenderness and passion that had been building between them for months. Sarah responded in kind, her heart light with the realization that she had found love again when she least expected it. They were married in June, beneath the cottonwoods where their new home was nearly completed. The ceremony was simple but joyful, with Sarah's children playing important roles. Mary held the small bouquet of wildflowers that matched the one pinned to Clayton's coat. James stood proudly as his mother's escort, while the younger children scattered flower petals and giggled with excitement. The entire county turned out to celebrate, many having watched the romance unfold with approving eyes. The widow Foster and the solitary rancher had both been well respected individually. Together, they represented the kind of resilience and mutual support that defined frontier life. After the celebration, when the guests had departed and the children were settled in the old farmhouse for one last night, Clayton led Sarah to their newly completed home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Irwin," he said, lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Sarah wrapped her arms around his neck, remembering the first time he had carried her exhausted and defeated and marveling at how far they had come. The house was everything Sarah could have dreamed of, spacious enough for their large family, but cozy with thoughtful touches. Clayton had insisted on building bookshelves in the main room, knowing Sarah's love of reading, and the kitchen was designed with her height in mind, unlike the two tall counters in the old farmhouse. "You like it?" Clayton asked as he set her down, suddenly uncertain. Sarah turned a slow circle, taking it all in. "It's perfect," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Everything is perfect." Later that night, as they lay together in their new bedroom, Sarah rested her head on Clayton's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I would find this again," she admitted. "After Thomas died, I was so focused on survival that I couldn't imagine letting myself love someone new." Clayton stroked her hair. "Life has a way of surprising us. When I found you in that field last summer, I was just being neighborly. I had no idea I was meeting the woman who would change my life." "You saved me that day," Sarah said, "not just from exhaustion, but from the belief that I had to do everything alone." "And you saved me from a life of solitude," Clayton replied. "Seems we're well matched." 1 year to the day after Clayton had found Sarah collapsed in her wheat field, they stood together on the porch of their home, watching as their combined ranch flourished before them. The children played in the yard, their laughter carried on the summer breeze. Sarah leaned against her husband's strong shoulder, her hand resting on her slightly rounded belly. "You think we're crazy adding to our brood?" she asked, a smile in her voice. Clayton placed his hand over hers. "I think we're blessed. And I think this little one will have the best big brothers and sisters any child could ask for." As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in brilliant gold and crimson, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the depths of despair and exhaustion, she had found not just survival but joy. The man beside her had carried her home when she could no longer walk, and in doing so, had carried her into a new life filled with love and possibility. "What are you thinking about?" Clayton asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "I'm thinking about how sometimes the hardest falls lead us to exactly where we're meant to be," Sarah replied, turning to face him. "And I'm thinking about how grateful I am that you were there to pick me up." Clayton gently kissed her forehead. "I'll always be there to carry you, Sarah. Though I must admit, I prefer when we walk side by side." As darkness settled over the Montana prairie, the light from their windows spilled out like a beacon. Inside, 7 children, soon to be 8, and 2 people who had found each other against all odds created the symphony of a family built on love, resilience, and the simple miracle of being exactly where they belonged. The wheat fields that had once been the site of Sarah's greatest struggle now represented their shared abundance. The land that had nearly broken her had become the foundation of their joy. And the man who had once been a solitary figure on the horizon was now the center of a life more fulfilling than Sarah could have imagined in her darkest hours. As Clayton and Sarah called the children in for supper, their voices mingling in the evening air, the promise they had made to each other beneath the cottonwoods echoed in their hearts to face whatever came together, strong enough to carry each other through any storm that life might bring.